On June 19th, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger finally arrived in Texas to issue General Order Number 3, which released the enslaved people of Texas. This was 2.5 years after Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation. I think it's super disappointing that it took until 2021 under Biden to have a federal holiday for this, as these steps towards we the people and treating human beings, all human beings, like equals, should be celebrated at every turn, because we've come from a really dark past and a lot of people want to go back to that dark past, but we continue to move forward in small but progressive ways. And I think today is a big day. I think it is a huge day. I think it's absolutely something everybody should celebrate. It's disappointing as well in the fact that there are still people who push against it. You know, you have, I think Trump ran on making Juneteenth a holiday in 2020 when he was running for re-election, and then promptly abandoned that and started to criticize non-working holidays on Juneteenth. I think that's sad. And there is a group of people who do not celebrate the freedom of other human beings, and we're still dealing with that. But I think slowly we are moving forward. And I say that from the space of a white entitled man. So my words kind of mean shit. And the words of people who have been enslaved because of their color, because of where they're from, mean a hell of a lot more than mine do. But I think this is something that is long overdue and being celebrated. And it's something we all should celebrate just as members of the human race. So happy Juneteenth. Thanks.
So I saw a weird post today that basically was like making fun of Black people for celebrating Juneteenth. And it said like, oh, like, ha ha ha, like Juneteenth isn't for Black people, it's for Black Texans. And I feel like that completely misses the history of how Juneteenth became a national holiday in the first place. And before I get into like what Juneteenth is and the history of it, I want to say as a white American, I want to be careful that I don't like speak over anybody, but I do feel like it's important for white people to also know this history, because it's not just Black history, it's American history. This is an important part of our shared history that all of us should definitely understand. So Juneteenth exists because about 250,000 people were still enslaved in Texas. This is about 2.5 years after they were supposed to be freed. So 1863, Abe Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation declaring enslaved people in Confederate states free. But a proclamation on paper and freedom in practice were two very different things, because Texas was pretty far from most of the major battlefields of the Civil War. So slaveholders had moved enslaved people into Texas during the war, like away from everything. And there weren't enough Union troops to enforce emancipation. So slavery continued heavily in Texas. So on June 19th, 1865, this is where Juneteenth comes from, the Union Major General Gordon Granger arrives in Galveston, Texas, and publicly reads General Order Number 3. And it says, the people of Texas are informed that in ordinance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. So that day becomes known as Juneteenth. The following year, 1866, Black Texans held the first Juneteenth celebration. So they gathered to pray, to read the proclamation out loud. They were singing freedom songs, sharing meals, and celebrating the freedom that had been delayed for them for years, because segregation had also already taken hold, and many public parks excluded Black Americans. They basically also had nowhere to celebrate. So then by 1872, Black leaders in Houston raised $1,000 to purchase 10 acres of land that became Emancipation Park, which was one of the first parks in Texas purchased specifically for Juneteenth celebrations. So now here is where that post falls apart. Juneteenth did start in Texas, but it didn't stay in Texas, because between like 1910 to like about 1970, Great Migration takes place. Okay. Millions of Black Americans leave the South. They're looking for jobs, looking for somewhere safer to be, better opportunities, trying to escape like Jim Crow laws, racial violence, voter suppression, economic exploitation. So a lot of Black Texans moved to like Chicago, Detroit, Oakland, Los Angeles, like Seattle, Denver, Pittsburgh, New York City, Washington, D.C. They brought Juneteenth with them, is my point. The holiday spread across the country because the people who celebrated it spread across the country. So families carried the tradition with them, churches carried the tradition with them, entire communities carried the tradition with them. So while Juneteenth began as Texas's celebration, it became a national Black American tradition through migration and community. Another interesting thing I saw is that there was a white person that had posted a comment that was like, well, why isn't Juneteenth just like during Black History Month? And that's when I really realized like people don't know what Juneteenth is. And it's a very common misconception amongst white Americans. And it's because Juneteenth survived for over 100 years before the government officially recognized it. I think 1980 is when Texas officially recognized Juneteenth as a state holiday, which is still more than 100 years after Black Americans had already been celebrating it. And then in 2021, 156 years after it began, Juneteenth finally becomes a federal holiday. And while we're talking about history getting lost, let's talk about the flag. So a lot of companies use like the red, black, and green for Juneteenth because those are the Pan-African colors. But the official Juneteenth flag is actually red, white, and blue. The star in the center represents Texas, where Juneteenth began. The burst around it symbolizes a new beginning. And then the curved horizon represents a promise of freedom, expanding into the future. The colors were chosen deliberately to make a point. Black Americans' fight for freedom is inseparable from American history. It is American history. So to respond to that original post that I saw, no, Juneteenth is not just for Black Texans. It started with Black Texans, but because of the Great Migration and the generations of Black Americans that kept the tradition alive, it became a part of Black American history, period. Juneteenth is the story of freedom that was delayed, and freedom that was having to be enforced, and a community that essentially refused to let that history be forgotten. And I think that's awesome. So happy Juneteenth. Love you guys.
When slavery ended, the federal government paid reparations to the slave owners, but they didn't pay reparations to the enslaved people.
Okay, let's look at the actual receipts for this. April 16th, 1862. President Lincoln signs a law that ends slavery in Washington, D.C. But the government doesn't just set people free. They treat it like eminent domain. What does that mean? Eminent domain is when the government takes private property and converts it to public use. But they can't just seize your property. They have to pay you for it. And since Black people were considered property and not human beings who never should have been owned in the first place, Congress appropriated $1 million to compensate the loyal white slave owners for their financial loss. So slave owners hired appraisers to value the human beings that they owned, and the government paid them up to $300 per enslaved person. In today's money, that is thousands of dollars of taxpayer-funded government restitution paid to the oppressor. And what did the newly emancipated Black Americans get for the generations of unpaid labor that built the nation's capital? Nothing. Nada. Actually, that's not entirely true. They were offered up to $100 on the condition that they leave the United States and self-deport to somewhere like Haiti or Liberia. Which, if that sounds familiar... So if you think handing out money to right a historical wrong isn't the American way, it actually kind of is. The government has been willing to pay reparations.
Now, listening to these white Americans, one thing stands out. Many of them see Juneteenth as an important part of American history that deserves recognition, deserves respect, and, remembrance. I mean, they speak about freedom, the long road toward equality, toward, equal rights, and why they believe this holiday matters not only to Black people, but to America as a whole country. Some focus on the history itself, others reflect on how America continues to wrestle with its past, but every story can sound differently depending on who exactly is telling it. History may be shared, yet people often connect it to, from every different experiences and perspectives. Now, that's where, things get interesting. Let's hear the same story from Black people. How are they telling this? We believe that every story is best told by the owner. Unfortunately, black history has been written by, people who are not black. So we cannot trust the authenticity, like the truth of that story. Books people were learning at school were written by black people, were written by the oppressor. So it's always easy for them to manipulate in their favor. They can easily make it like slavery wasn't that bad, okay? Yet when you go on the ground, truth are being discovered these days that, slavery was too much. It's beyond what books say. So let's hear from black Americans themselves. How do they explain Juneteenth? What parts of the story do they emphasize most? Are there things they see differently from what we have just heard from these white people? Well, let's listen closely to their voices and their perspective for ourselves. Otherwise, I wish you all the best.
I don't think enough people know who Opal Lee is. Most people know Juneteenth. They know it's a holiday now. They know there's a cookout somewhere. They know they don't have to go to work. But the woman called the grandmother of Juneteenth, a lot of people couldn't even tell you her story. In 1939, Opal Lee was 12 years old. Her family had just bought a home in Fort Worth, Texas. 4 days later, on Juneteenth, a white mob showed up. About 500 people. The police were called, but the mob stayed. Opal's family got out, but the mob broke in and destroyed everything they owned. And I keep coming back to that date, Juneteenth, a date that's supposed to commemorate freedom. A 12-year-old black girl watching a crowd decide that her family didn't belong. On that day of all days, and Opal Lee remembered it for the rest of her life. Now, if you know anything about black families, you know we don't just carry photographs and heirlooms. We carry stories. The stories our grandparents told, the stories our parents told, the stories we refused to let disappear. And Opal carried that one with her for decades. Most people know Juneteenth as June 19th, 1865, the day Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, and informed enslaved people that they were free. But here's the part that gets missed. Too often, really. Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation 2.5 years earlier. The enslaved people of Texas were legally free. The problem with that is that freedom on paper and freedom in real life aren't always the same thing. It took the Union troops arriving in Galveston to enforce it. That's what Juneteenth commemorates. Not just freedom, the delay, the distance between what the government says and what people actually experience. And if you're Black in America, that theme just keeps showing up, doesn't it? Then Opal Lee got older, much older, 89 years old, an age where people have earned the right to sit down if they want to, you know? But Opal decided to start walking. She wanted Juneteenth recognized as a federal holiday. Originally, she wanted to walk from Fort Worth to Washington, D.C., but her family convinced her not to do the whole trip. So she started walking 2.5 miles in cities across the country instead. But that number wasn't random, y'all. It represented the 2.5 years between the Emancipation Proclamation and Juneteenth. City after city, year after year, she collected more than 1.6 million signatures. And while a lot of people were just discovering Juneteenth, Opal Lee was making sure that nobody could forget it anymore. Then in June of 2021, she stood beside President Biden as he signed Juneteenth into law as a federal holiday. She was 94 years old. The same woman whose home had been destroyed by a racist mob on Juneteenth. The same woman who spent years walking so people would remember the significance of that day. The same little girl from Fort Worth, standing in the White House watching Juneteenth finally receive federal recognition. History usually doesn't give people moments like that, you know? But Miss Lee got one. So that's why we have to keep coming back to her story, because when people think about Juneteenth, they usually talk about the holiday itself, right? But I keep thinking about the people that carried that history long enough for us to inherit it. People who refused to let that story disappear. People who kept telling it even when nobody was listening. People who understood that if you don't protect a story, eventually somebody else is going to rewrite it. Opal Lee is 99 years old. Opal Lee is 99 years old. In October, she will be 100. She is still here, still reminding people what Juneteenth actually commemorates. And if anybody's earned the title of Grandmother of Juneteenth, it's probably the woman who spent the majority of her life making sure that the rest of us remembered. Say her name, Opal Lee.
The same way we want men to check other men about the patriarchy, white people to check other white people about racism, straight people to check other straight people about homophobia, queerphobia, transphobia, non-Black Americans need to be checking other non-Black Americans about anti-Black Americanness. And yes, this is very top of mind on the eve of Juneteenth, a Black American holiday, celebrating Black American liberation, particularly in Texas. From one first-generation American born to Haitian immigrants in Brooklyn, New York in 1989 to another, tomorrow is not about you. Tomorrow is not supposed to center you. This is not a Pan-African holiday. This is not a diasporic holiday. This is a Black American holiday. And although you're invited to celebrate, and as a non-Black American, there are so many reasons to celebrate. My parents being able to immigrate from Haiti in the 1980s to pursue the American dream, to go and graduate from college, to have careers, to buy homes, is only possible because of the blood, sweat, tears, and sacrifice of Black American people. Celebrate, but do it from a place of respect, decentering yourself, reverence, and deference. You benefit from the work of Black Americans if you live in America. And honestly, when we think of Black culture as an export, we all benefit from it. It is fucked up that you put Juneteenth on the party flyer and it's gonna be I'm a Piano Afrobeats. It's fucked up. Hell, I saw a flyer for a food event called Soul to Soul, Soul like Seoul Korea, featuring a Haitian chef and a Korean chef. And they had the nerve to put Juneteenth on the flyer. Have your event on June 19th, 20th, 21st, but don't invoke the name and the holiday of Juneteenth. Get Juneteenth off that flyer, off that Eventbrite page, off that Posh.VIP page, if it's not centering and benefiting Black Americans and Black American culture. Think of something else. Honestly, it feels like a cheap marketing ploy because you know people are looking for things to do for the holiday. Hell, that Soul to Soul event, do it in the name of Caribbean Heritage Month, which is also in June. Honestly, invoking the word soul, S-O-U-L, I low-key have a problem with as well. Soul food is a very specific food way, a Black American. And I don't know if you're just using Juneteenth as like interchangeable language for June 19th, right? Juneteenth is on June 19th, but it's not interchangeable for June 19th. Just because something is happening on June 19th doesn't mean it's Juneteenth. That's like an event happening on January 1st, 1er Janvier, on Haitian Independence Day, and someone is having an event and doing it in the name of Haitian Independence Day, and it doesn't center Haitians and Haitian culture. You put in 1er Janvier, Fête Indépendance on the flyer, but ain't no Haitians. Does that? And if non-Haitians, étrangers, were to celebrate Haitian Independence Day, we would want it to be from a place of, wow, look at the descendants, the people of the first free Black Republic, and how their Black liberation was the catalyst for all of these other Black people around the globe to be liberated.
So I'm in the park and I just heard this young white woman ask somebody else what events they were going to tomorrow, and saying that they were looking forward to having the day off. And it got me frustrated, and I might have a hot take. I don't think that anybody but Black people should be resting or partying tomorrow. I think that Juneteenth, especially because of the history of what Juneteenth stands for, should be a holiday where everyone else, because you have the day off, because you get this time, should be activating around how you can support Black people, right? In some way, whether it's on an individual basis or institutional basis. Especially for me, like, I'm over here spending my Juneteenth as a Black person, raising money to help Black people through mutual aid, so on and so forth. And it's just like, huh? Anyway, if you are seeing this and you are someone who's non-Black and wants to support Black people, donate here. We're helping 100 unhoused Black people with hygiene products, cash, food, socks, and so on and so forth in care packages. And we've done this for almost 10 years in a row. Anyway.
Welcome back. Now, after listening to both sides, the side of white people and the side of Black people, I think something very important stands out. The white Americans, we hate them from focused mostly on the history, the importance of freedom, and why Juneteenth deserves recognition, across entire country as, something that belongs to America, not only to black people. Many of them viewed it as an American story, okay? A reminder of how far a nation of America has come and how far it still has to go. But when we listen to black Americans, the conversation felt much, much personal, okay? It felt much personal. It was not just about, a date on a calendar. It was not just about a federal holiday or a day off. It was about memory, about family, about, some sacrifices, and the generations of people who refused to let this history, disappear. I mean, one thing that really stood out to me was, how often the speakers talked about protecting the meaning of this day, the Juneteenth. Not because they want to exclude some people, like those who are non-black, no, but because they want to have the story behind the holiday, something that can never be forgotten, right? And honestly, that is something many people, can probably understand, because the more you celebrate something, the more that thing, keeps to stick in your mind, okay? Something you tend to not, think about, your brain will automatically put it to like short-term memory, and you eventually forget. But the more you talk about it, the more you celebrate it, is when it becomes something, you can remember forever, and you can easily pass to other generations. Now, every community has moments in its history that are like deeply personal, moments that help to shape like who they are today. So when black Americans say Juneteenth should center black Americans, whether people agree with this or they will not, but it is important to understand where that feeling really comes from. This holiday exists because of a very specific history. It's not a day that just came out of nowhere. A history of slavery, delayed, freedom, and the struggle to make freedom, actual thing, the reality, to make freedom a reality. Now, one of the more interesting arguments we had was not about whether non-black Americans should celebrate. No, it was about how they should celebrate, right? About, some people believe should celebrate together, people look at it differently. Others argue that Juneteenth should be a day of action, okay? You shouldn't just celebrate. It should be a day of, action, a day to support communities, a day to donate. Somebody argued that today I'm donating. He even actually said you can donate to this. He said a link, so you can follow his page, because I've put where I got the video, so you can go and donate, because that's what the day is all about. A day to donate, to volunteer, to educate yourself, or invest in causes that address challenges still facing many black Americans today. And somebody can ask, are still black people suffering? Okay, so that's the thing. People are still suffering. Slavery is still there. It just changed the form. Okay, discrimination is still there. So there is a need to support this thing. If it's a day for this beautiful history, then it's a day of action. And honestly, I can understand why some people make that argument that it shouldn't be a day where you just celebrate and then you let it go. Do something. May somebody who is in some situations, in bad situations, at least acknowledge that, this day I've received this day I've been helped this way. To them, that day will continue to mean more. Because if a holiday is meant to honor freedom and sacrifice, then perhaps part of honoring that history is asking what responsibility comes with remembering it. It's not something that you can just remember it and then you let it go. Not just enjoying off a day, but thinking about what the day really represents. Like this Juneteenth, what does it really represent? Thinking about the people who came before us. Okay, thinking about the struggles they endured, the doors they opened for future generations. Now we're talking of people of today. People had to sacrifice. Okay, if the ancestors of black Americans were selfish, they could just leave it alone. They could just escape. They could just do whatever. But these guys, they fought a good fight. Some people were killed in the process, but the remaining ones were not backing down. They were placing more up until there was a time when God intervened, and the effort of these guys, it proved to be, yeah, these guys fought a good fight. Today, yeah, some of those things are not there anymore. Now, whether someone chooses to celebrate with family or attend, a community event, or learn more about history or support a local cause, the bigger message seems to be the same. Do not let the meaning get lost, okay? You can do whatever you want. Make sure this day is stuck on your head, is always with you. Do not reduce Juneteenth to just another holiday on the calendar. No, because behind the cookouts, the festivals, the celebrations, there is a story. This is more than a day on a calendar. A story of people waiting years of freedom that had already been promised to them. Imagine being promised. It's like you're in jail and somebody say, okay, release them. But look, those people are not releasing you, but actually that thing is not happening, but you were promised, you were told to be released, but years are going. How painful is that? So it's a story of resilience, a story of perseverance, and some sort of hope that in the future this thing will be over. Yeah, and perhaps that is why Juneteenth continues to matter more to so many people today, and it should really matter more to many people even in the future. Not only because it tells us something about the past, no, but it's because it challenges all of us to think about what freedom, what equality and justice truly mean in the present. And no matter where you stand in this discussion, that is the conversation worth having. How do you celebrate Juneteenth? It depends, okay? But the message is simple. Don't let this day, get lost from your head, okay? It's something that the more you need to be thinking about it, okay, so that it will be passed on. When you are celebrating, celebrate with the kids, so they should understand this. They should grow up knowing this thing, okay? So they should also celebrate forever with their future kids, future generations. It should keep, getting passed to other generations. Otherwise, that's my take. I don't know what's your take. Let's discuss in the comment section. How did those, white people discuss this issue? How did you look at their narration of the story? So how about the story of Opal Lee that was talked about? How do you look at it? So anyway, I love that you came to watch the video. See you next time, and I'm proud of you. If this is your first time, please subscribe so we can have more of discussions.